Fairfax County neighborhood this morning. A man's body found along the side of a road in a rural area, and we've just learned the name of the victim, 30-year-old Michael Cooker of Herndon. Northern Virginia Bureau Chief Peggy Fox tells us the body was found near the site of an urban legend. Tell us more, Peg.
The first thing I noticed when I got to the scene this morning is that the body was found right near this railroad bridge. It's known as the Bunnyman Bridge. It's a crazy urban legend that draws hordes of teenagers to this part of rural Fairfax County every Halloween. About 900 feet that way, a neighbor found the body of a man this morning, lying right on the side of Colchester Road.
In the early morning at 6:49 a.m. on April 18th, 2018, the body of a man was found on the side of the road by a nearby resident along the 650 block of Colchester Road in Fairfax Station. The man was later identified as 30-year-old Michael Cooker of Herndon, Virginia. Cooker suffered upper body trauma, and at the time of the discovery, it was unclear as to what happened to the victim or why his body was left near the bridge. Although this was the most recent incident in Fairfax, this isn't the only gruesome murder to occur near the bridge. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and my name is Kat, and this is part 2 of the Bunnyman Bridge. In the last episode, we covered the urban legend and the overall history of the bridge and the railroad that it's connected to. And in today's episode, we'll be taking a deep dive into the real-life murders in the area surrounding the bridge, and if they have any links to the Bunnyman, or if they're just real-life monsters that live among us, i.e. human beings. And with that being said, let's get right into the creepy. And if you're a fan of this type of content and you like anything that's deal with the dark, spooky, or mysterious, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for future videos. Aside from the bizarre dress and behavior of our furry friend, the most terrifying aspect about the Bunnyman, according to the legend, are the numerous murders of both people and animals. But what's an axe-wielding madman without a few victims, right? Well, there may be a slight problem with his supposed body count. According to Brian A. Conley, a historian and archivist at the Fairfax County Library, researching historical crimes can be very difficult, unless you have some basic facts to begin with. Since police records are not available for casual review, and court records are indexed by the names of those involved, not by the location or type of crime, I had to begin by checking the local newspapers. With the help of library volunteers Malcolm Richardson and Barbara Welch, the three were able to create a timeline of every murder and killing reported by the local press from 1872 through 1973. Even though Fairfax County was a rural farming community well into the 20th century, there were over 550 individual mentions of killings when researching the area. By eliminating the run-of-the-mill domestic murders and concentrating on the multiple murders and those involving children, the three were able to pare down the list of more than 500 possible events to the following 3. Peter Roy was a Danish immigrant who came to Fairfax from Minnesota in 1912. In November of that year, he purchased 2 plots of land near the current intersection of the Old Keene Mill Road and Sid Strickner Road, totaling 180 acres. Roy, a widower, became a prosperous farmer and an active member of the Lee Chapel Methodist Church. His eldest daughter Caroline, her husband William K. German, and his younger daughter Ava lived along with him. On the morning of August 4th, 1918, Ava Roy, age 14, left her home near Burke at around 9 a.m. to tend to her father's small herd of cows. When Ava failed to return home that evening, her father began to search the area. Neighbors were soon enlisted to help, but 24 hours later, her body was found tied to a tree in the woods near the old Hans house, with her apron strings tight around her throat. The county coroner, Dr. W.I. Robbie, concluded that the girl had been brutally assaulted before being strangled to death. A coroner's jury was quickly appointed and concluded, "We, the jury, find that Ava Roy came to her death at the hands of some unknown person, and the indications point to Lou Hall as a probable perpetrator of the crime." Lou Hall, a 33-year-old woodcutter, lived about a half mile from the scene of the crime and was seen in the woods at the same time of Ava's disappearance. Although this case was not to be easily solved, as other suspects were soon identified and easily eliminated. The first of the potential suspects was 16-year-old William Wooster. Wooster was arrested for assaulting a colored girl and had recently been released from an insane asylum, but it was later discovered that he was nowhere near the scene of Ava's murder. The second suspect to emerge was a soldier who deserted from Camp A.A. Humphreys, now Fort Belvoir. The soldier, a sergeant whom the papers did not name, was located some days later near Charlottesville, Virginia. He had scratches on his face and hands and was wearing freshly laundered clothes and claimed to have no memory of the events between his leaving Camp Humphreys and his capture. Sheriff Allison traveled to Charlottesville to interview the man, but after some weeks of investigation, determined that he was not connected with the crime. The lagging investigation seemed to finally receive a break with the apprehension of Ben Rubin, an escaped inmate from Lorton Prison. Rubin, who had been serving a 3-year sentence for breaking and entering at Lorton Prison, was 19 years old. He was arrested by Washington, D.C. police on September 19th for assaulting a little girl. While on the way to the police station, he confessed to Ava's murder. Rubin claimed he had met Ava looking after her father's cows. He then asked her for food, and in a conversation with her, he told her he was an ex-convict. She said that she would turn him up, as he declared, and he became excited and choked her. The Washington authorities were unconvinced by Rubin's story and wanted to try him for assault and theft before turning him over to the Virginia courts. An investigator sent by the Commonwealth of Virginia to interview Rubin concluded that he was not responsible for the crime, but extradition papers were filed anyway. On September 26, Rubin was escorted to the scene of the crime by Sheriff Allison, Commonwealth Attorney C. Vernon Ford, Assistant Commonwealth Attorney Wilson M. Farr, Dr. Swetnam, and Acting Counsel for the Defense F.D. Richardson. After being unable to locate the scene of the attack or the tree where the body was left, William denied killing Eva. He claimed that the presence of the girl's father spurred him to recant his confession. Rubin's motive for confessing was revealed some weeks later when, on October 6, he escaped from the jail in Fairfax. He was arrested 2 days later while attempting to buy a pistol and admitted that he concocted a story in order to be transferred to Fairfax, where he thought escaping would be easier. He was eventually convicted of burglary and escaped from jail and was sentenced to 4 more years in prison. Lou Hall was finally tried for the murder in Fairfax County Court. The prosecution was handled by State's Attorney C. Vernon Ford and assisted by Wilson M. Farr. Hall's defense was provided by Walter T. Oliver. Hall's first trial resulted in a hung jury with 9 guilty votes and 3 innocent. His second trial resulted in a clear verdict of not guilty. Peter Roy later died on January 22, 1938, and was buried in Lee Chapel Cemetery next to his youngest daughter. Unfortunately, her murderer was never found. Although the available newspapers recorded many murders, but few shocked Fairfax like the ferocious and senseless attack of Mrs. Minnie Ridgeway and her 2 young daughters. Mrs. Ridgeway lived with her husband and 3 children on Telegraph Road in Alexandria, Virginia. On the morning of March 4th, 1927, a man later identified as Louis Borsig called the home on the pretext of seeing Mr. Ridgeway. Upon discovering that he was not at home, Borsig attacked and beat Minnie Ridgeway into unconsciousness, and then likewise bludgeoned her daughters, Loretta 7 and Catherine 5. Then stole money from the home and fled the scene. The crime was unfortunately discovered by a neighbor who heard moans coming from inside the house. All 3 victims were taken to Alexandria Hospital, where Loretta later died. Catherine Ridgeway lived another 8 days before succumbing to her injuries. Minnie, however, was a lone survivor who recovered and was able to identify the assailant, who was known to the Ridgeways. Borsig was arrested at his home and transferred to the jail in Winchester, Virginia for his safety. Okay, so just to pause right here. So you murdered a group of people in their own home. You murdered a family, a mother and her 2 daughters, and you're moved to another jail in another county, mind you, so that you can be safe. Yeah, that part's pretty lost on me, but yeah, just a little segue here. That upsets me greatly. Louis Borsig was executed for the murders of Loretta and Catherine Ridgeway on July 7th, 1927, just 3 months after his horrific crime. On Thursday, February 24th, 1949, 37-year-old Frances Hobler and her 8-month-old daughter drove to Fairfax County in the company of her estranged husband, Charles. The Hobler family were all residents of Washington, D.C., and Charles Hobler later told police that they had come to Fairfax to see the new lodge at a nudist colony in which Mr. Hobler belonged. Upon leaving the lodge, the car became stuck in the mud along the road. The couple then argued, and Mrs. Hobler took the child and walked away from her husband, only never to return. Charles Hobler ultimately spent the night in the car and eventually got a ride back to Washington the following day. He later returned to Fairfax with his brother-in-law and friend to retrieve the car. Still finding no evidence of his family over the following days, the police were finally notified. An intensive search of the area was soon organized, involving Fairfax County Police, Washington detectives, and the Boy Scouts. Around 5 p.m., just as the searchers were about to give up for the night, one of the detectives noted that the ground on which they were standing on was very soft. The bodies of both mother and daughter were found in a shallow grave next to the lodge and less than 200 yards from where Charles Hobler's car had been stuck. Frances Hobler had been beaten and then shot twice, once in the head and once in the heart. The infant child had been unfortunately buried alive. In the advent of the tragic news, the local community was shocked and horrified by the cold, brutal character of this crime, especially when the investigation identified Charles Hobler as a prime suspect. Hobler later confessed to investigators that he had planned the murder for 3 weeks and had not intended to report the disappearance of his wife, but then changed his plan when the car got stuck in the mud. The case came to trial on January 16, 1950. After hearing 4 days of testimony, the jury returned with a verdict of guilty, and Hobler was sentenced to die in the electric chair. Hobler's attorney, T. Brooke Howard, filed an appeal alleging that the jury failed to give proper consideration to the plea of insanity, and that the court made errors in its instruction to the jury. The Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals eventually overturned the conviction and ordered a new trial. Charles Francis Hobler was recommitted to the Western State Mental Hospital in Marion, Virginia, where he was judged to be insane. Aside from the gruesome urban legend, the murders that occurred in Fairfax County and near and around the bridge unfortunately left a dark aura surrounding the county. One of the consistencies that I did find with some of the murders is that the bodies were discovered in the morning, which in that case also links back to Michael Hooker. I know that it's just a coincidence, but it is pretty strange that the bodies were discovered during that time of day. Jumping back to the unfortunate murder of Michael Hooker, I would like to take a moment to get to know who he was in life and how he found his way to the Colchester Overpass. The information being presented about the victim is for educational purposes only, and by no means is a vehicle to cause harm or pain to his family. I ask that everyone please be respectful if discussing the subject matter in the comments. Michael Hooker was born on September 29, 1987, in Arlington, Virginia. He grew up in Sterling, Virginia, and studied digital arts and graphics at Full Sail University in Orlando, Florida. After college, Michael lived in San Diego, California, and eventually moved back to Centerville, Virginia, where he then used his digital art skills in both the private industry and as an entrepreneur. He loved both hip-hop and rap, and wrote and recorded numerous songs and music videos. Although Michael had a bright and promising future, he unfortunately became entangled in the world of substance abuse. It was later discovered that 3 men were involved and later indicted for his murder, stemming from an alleged cannabis trafficking dispute. Charles Anthony Forbes, 30 of Reston, pled guilty to using a firearm to commit a drug-related murder. In March, Freddie Fabian Alfaro, 36 of Reston, and Jamie Marcel McCrae, 36 of Sterling, pled guilty to aiding and abetting the murder and to conspiring to distribute cannabis. According to the court documents, from January through April of 2018, Alfaro had conspired with victim Michael Cooker and others to ship cannabis from California and sell it in Northern Virginia. In April of 2018, Alfaro and Cooker had a dispute over the conspiracy's profits. On the night of April 17, 2018, Alfaro and Cooker continued their disputes through a series of text messages. In the early morning of April 18, 2018, Alfaro called McCrae and offered him compensation to physically harm Cooker. Alfaro's motive was his dispute with Cooker over the drug conspiracy. McCrae then contacted Forbes and told him that Alfaro had offered him monetary compensation to physically harm Cooker. Around the same time, Cooker, McCrae, Forbes, and an unknown individual had been spending time together in Herndon, Virginia. Around 6 a.m. on April 18, 2019, Cooker, McCrae, Forbes, and the individual then drove in separate vehicles to Chantilly, Virginia. It was here that McCrae provided Forbes with a Smith & Wesson revolver. Forbes and Cooker then left the area in one of the vehicles. Forbes then drove Cooker to a wooded road in Fairfax Station. Around 6:30 a.m., Forbes pulled the vehicle over to the side of the road and then shot Cooker twice in the head, instantly killing him. Forbes then got back into the vehicle and drove away, leaving Cooker's body there on the side of the road near Colchester Overpass. On November 6, 2020, Alfaro was sentenced to a total of 21 years in prison, and McCrae was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Forbes faced the maximum term of life in prison when he was sentenced on April 9th of 2021. Now, in regard to the location in which this incident occurred, I don't believe it had anything to do with superstition or the urban legend. It was just a quiet and desolate stretch of road, and therefore no one would be nearby to witness someone committing this crime. Now that we've reviewed the murders that happened near the bridge, it's easy to see the connections between some of the variations of the Bunnyman urban legends and the reports covering the murders from the local newspapers. The individuals involved, such as William Wooster, who was released from the asylum, and Ben Rubin, who escaped from Lorton Prison, created panic and fear amongst residents of Fairfax County. In a way, the legend of the Bunnyman could be viewed as a coping mechanism for some people living in Fairfax. By putting those real-life events together and adding terrifying fictional elements to the origin story, it created the creature that we now know today as the Bunnyman. And the legend has since become a source of fun during Halloween, even if some of the locals don't necessarily like the influx of legend trippers searching for the Bunnyman. Unfortunately for Robert Bennett, his fiancée, and Paul Phillips, who all encountered a strange man armed with an axe in 1970, will continue to live with those memories of those fateful evenings to this day. As for the Colchester Overpass, it's nothing but an ordinary bridge, with a rich history of war, murder, and now people looking for a good scare from the infamous Bunnyman. And that's where I'm going to end today's video. I definitely have to say I thoroughly enjoyed researching this topic, even though it did take a turn for the dark in most cases. When I first, of course, heard about the Bunnyman urban legend, I definitely did not think it was real. I thought it was really silly because the name is hilarious. It's a guy in a bunny suit. You're thinking this is ridiculous. But when I started hearing more of the details in regard to what he does to his victims, that definitely became more freaky, especially the murders of those innocent rabbits. The overall history of the Colchester Overpass was definitely interesting in regard to its murders, both the ones from the past and the present. I do give my condolences to the families of the victims involved and also to the victims themselves. It's a bit insane that so many incidents occurred in that area, especially during times in which they did, like for instance 1918. That just feels it's like so long ago, and like the fact that there were over 550 mentions of killings in the area, that's quite bizarre for a mostly rural part of the state during that time in the 20th century. And of course, if you want to go visit the bridge, you can. I recommend doing it. Just don't do it when there's a bunch of people out there, like for instance during Halloween. Just do it if you have some time, if you're in the area. When you're there, please be sure to remain respectful of that area, because it's technically it's not a gravesite per se. Just be respectful of the area because there were people who did pass there. But other than that, if you're looking for the Bunny Man, you might come across some guy dressed in a bunny suit just having a go at the people looking for the Bunny Man, but you're not going to come across any axe-wielding madmen at Colchester Overpass anytime soon. And with that being said, I want to thank you again for watching and joining me here for another episode of Hometown Horror. Hopefully, I will have my next video up pretty soon for you guys. And with that being said, I love you and good night.